externally. Just want to give you some idea. If you're working with this kind of kid or young adult, it'll give you an opportunity to kind of explore what you can do to have real impact with them. And of course, we are open for questions in any number of ways on this webinar, so please feel free to get back with us, and it'll be a nice way for all of us to talk about what you came to learn about. I am going to give, okay, Dale, how do I do this here? Okay, dope, bud. What did you do?
Just hit the button.
Here?
Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that little glitch. I'll talk a little bit about hierarchy so you can understand kind of how to look at the kids that you're dealing with. A big part of helping them is understanding where do they come from. Are they a Chicago-based gang? If they are, their potential, if they're, city organized, and I don't mean just Chicago, I mean any community where gangs have been a part of who they are for 15 or 17 or 20 years. So the gangs have been a part of the community enough that the gangs can identify themselves. They are a force in the community. Kids are choosing what gang they want to be a part of. So when I say Chicago-based, I'm not just, in their words, dissing Chicago. I'm really looking at the kind of gang. So if a kid is in this kind of gang, they can participate at a couple of levels. A surface player, meaning that they're growing up in a place, frankly, where kids shouldn't grow up. They've seen money change hands. They see colors. They see family members getting arrested. They know someone who's died in the gang. Young kids, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. Marginal gang member in a community where the gangs are well established could be, a 6, a 7, or 8-year-old kid, a kid who participates in the gang by means of doing favors for them, understanding a gang that they'd like to be a part of, has a clear knowledge of hand signs and signals, who's in the gang, who they admire, the gang that they want to move toward, and utilizes that as a power source or sometimes a bullying source with their peers. Marginal gang members make up nearly half the gang. About 45 to 47% of the entire gang are marginal members. Hardcore, more than half of the gang. These are guys who live, eat, and breathe for the gang. They have no other interests. It's their business. It's their lifestyle. It's their life engagement is their particular gang grouping. These guys don't expect to live past 18 to 20 years old. Many of their family members are in jail and or dead as a result of their involvement, and hardcore means hardcore. Elite members of the gang, guys that most of us who work in prevention and even in intervention have very little involvement with because they're so well insulated by the other layers of the gang, make up 2 to 5% of the gang. The money filters to them. I usually tell kids that money in the gang defies gravity. It goes up. And so these marginal gang members and many of the hardcore gang members never see the kind of money that the guys at the top experience. Now you'll notice I have economics, legacy, and gun. Now those aren't actually hierarchical structures of the gang, but those are 3 elements of the gang that make it very tough to work with this kind of kid. If the economics of the gang has a favorable impact on the kid, it becomes very, very difficult to work with them because they can't walk away from the money. I remember on working with a probation girl who was making $1,500 a night, essentially turning tricks, and then the probation officer is trying to tell her, we can get you a job at McDonald's. What does that mean to her? Gang kids whose families depend on their money, it becomes really difficult for those kids to walk away. And the sad part of it is so many kids get in it thinking this is my way out, and it only drives them further into the organization. Legacy gang members are gang members usually whose bloodline, regardless of their interest, their bloodline dictates their absolute involvement in the gang. a wonderful kid that I worked with who wanted to be an architect. His dad was in prison and wanted his kids all to be Latin kings. And so he basically said, if you're not a Latin king, if you haven't turned in the way I want you to turn by the time you're 16 years old, I'll have you taken out. And so this kid had no choice, if he wanted to live, to maintain his connection to the Latin King organization. Gun-oriented kids, kids who fire a weapon consistently, who know what caliber they prefer, who have a favorite gun, who have shot someone, those are kids whose humanity disappears eventually. I'd frankly much rather work with a kid who's, fighting with his fists or, even fighting with any other kind of weapon, a baseball bat or a knife, because that kid takes a humanity-driven risk that a gun kid doesn't take. A gun kid shoots, fires, and walks. He doesn't see pain register on somebody's face. He doesn't see or hear anybody cry out. He doesn't see blood flow. And every time he fires that gun, a piece of him disappears. So kids who fire guns consistently are kids who are very, very difficult to work with over the long haul because their humanness is definitely diminished. As we take a look at a little bit of chronology here, we think of gangs as a very new situation, but you can see that the gangs were appearing as early as the 1820s. By 1863, there was already a New York police force established to combat gang violence. Now, why New York? If you saw Gangs of New York, it was a very real depiction of people who came to the United States in whatever way they could get here, and the only way to protect themselves was to collude as small culture-based groupings and protect the very few things they brought with them, the very few things they had, and to protect their own. So they began to kind of live in groupings and survive in groupings. By 1919, we're looking at the Prohibition kind of time frame, and so we began to look at major crime organizations. People who are in it for the dollars, people who are in it in many criminal aspects. 1943, you take a look at that. There really is registered as early as 1936 in the United States were the appearance of the Latino gang groupings. That's significant because today the Latin King gang organization is probably one of the largest and most dangerous gangs, with the exception of some of the San Salvadorian gangs that have made their way into the United States. 1950s, and again, this is the first established youth board designed to take a look at issues of gang involvement. 1960s was a time of civil unrest, and we began to see the gangs have some division. There were ideological gangs who were more oriented to getting together as a group and maybe solidifying the gains of a single neighborhood, or making sure that a single culture was not, damaged by the laws or rules or, what have you in the community, versus delinquent gangs who are really just out there doing graffiti, dealing small-time drugs. And unfortunately in the 60s there were some common gang groupings, vice lords, the gangster disciples, who some of them split off and really tried to do some civil work, but I believe that some of the damage within them prevented them from hanging on to the idea of a gang as a civil organization who could do good in their communities. 1980s and 1990s was an incredible time for the gangs and a very difficult time for law enforcement, as super drugs and super gangs began to develop, where even gangs who never before had combined interests were suddenly connecting for the idea of dealing things like meth and crack cocaine, drugs that were making them more money than they had ever imagined. So that's just kind of a simple chronology for you. Let's take a look at what many of us experience, and I don't know where you're from, but the suburban gang groupings are probably some of the most interesting to watch develop. You know, first of all, you have that kind of fantasy kid, the kid in 3rd or 4th grade who, you know, kind of plays gang member. He sees some stuff on TV, an older brother may have given him some information, learned some hand signs or symbols or signals, and at some point we just kind of ignore it because he's a little kid. You know, in the suburbs we don't think of those kinds of dangers, and so it gets ignored. This happens often where a really awesome achieving kid connects with kind of a gang group who are not doing as well in school, who have probation histories already connected to them, who have legal histories, but somehow just being with those kind of bad boys or bad girls is appealing to them, and so they associate with the gang, and the gang allows it so that they can receive the things they want. So it could be a kid who's got a car, it could be a kid who's got some money, it could be a kid whose dad's a doctor and they have access to prescription pads, a kid who has access to their home on the weekends where parents are away at a lake house or something. So they associate with these kids for the purpose of getting what they want out of them without any real investment in having them being ritually involved in the gang. Marginal kids in the suburban area, it's the same frame as the Chicago gang grouping, but it's an older kid. So instead of 6 or 7 or 8 years old, you're looking at a 12 or 13-year-old kid. Hardcore is split in suburban areas. Some people are raised up in the gang, in the suburban gang areas. They're homegrown. They learned about gangs here, they operate here in the suburbs, and it works for them. Other kids are transplants. Parents begin to see what's happening in their home communities, begin to get worried, and move their kids to the suburbs, hoping that they can move their kids away from the gangs. And I think we understand that it becomes very difficult to simply change a kid's mind by, changing locations. So that usually doesn't work, although sometimes, you get your kid who, begins to feel more at ease here and more comfortable here, and things do improve for them. So it's not impossible, but a lot of times it doesn't work. Elite gang groupings in the suburban area are usually guys who, again, they're either transplant, they live in the suburbs. When Willie Lloyd, who was with the Vice Lords, was released from prison, he got in a white limo and didn't come to Chicago, but went to Deerfield, Illinois, where he had a condo, or a townhome, and it's much easier for guys to live in the suburbs, not have to fear reprisals or worry about watching their backs. So they sleep and eat here in the suburbs, and then go out to the city in the morning, and clear out their crack houses and get the money that they need. So really kind of depends on how you witness them, where they're from, and how they organize themselves. Rural gangs, again, you didn't really see a lot of this until the 70s, where outcast kids kind of find each other. I think we've all seen that happen. They become a nuisance then in their communities. They began to antagonize certain people that they feel have slighted them or diminished them in some way. Then they truly began to terrorize their community. And you'll see to the right where it says, begins with leader. If they have those elements in place, a leader, an identified victim, there's self-benefit, group benefit, there's some meditation about what they do, there's criminal thinking, criminal acts. Doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them insane Care Bears if you want. They're still a gang. Just to give you an idea of what's going on, DuPage County, one of the wealthiest counties in the state of Illinois, this is a little lower now, probably around 35 or so, but street gangs in DuPage are pretty high. Street gangs in Chicago usually range between 115 and 145, depending on who's up and who's down, and what gangs are moving in and what gangs are moving out. And the same thing with DuPage. And this can change by 10 or 15 gangs in a short period of time. So just to give you an idea. Gangs still do have the framework of identifying according to colors, identifying according to symbols. However, they are much more strict about not connecting in the community in that way. When I first started working with gangs, a gang-involved kid would not venture out in the community unless he was clearly marked. And now it's just a lot more subtle, but the framework is still there. You can see that still is a 6-pointed star, folks, gangs marked to the right. 5-pointed star are people gangs, and they mark their bodies, their clothes, tattoos to the left. So the way that I always remember it, by the way, is if you look at the word people and you add a FT to it, you'll always remember that people mark to the left. So I hope that helps you a little bit. The things that I see change in a community, and it lets you know exactly what's happening. Lots of gangs, when they first move into a community, have a strong racial orientation. We saw that in Chicago. To be a member of a black gangster disciple, you were African American. To be a part of Latin gangs, you were Latino, you were Hispanic. And as the gangs grow and change and began to feel and come into their own, you'll see that they began to accept other gender groupings, they accept other racial groupings into their organization and focus on territory. Having a Caucasian kid in a black gang only expands in their scope of power. So they can move much more comfortably throughout other neighborhoods if a person of that color helps them deal in that neighborhood. So in order to improve the scope of things, they usually become territorial versus racial. The gangs that do have racial connections usually have more of an ideological underpinning, like a skinhead kind of grouping. But if they're moving into your community, you will see on the front end that the gangs are racially oriented, and as they gain access and as they improve as a gang, you'll find that they begin to welcome in other genders and other races and connect territorially. This is the thing that I find very interesting about the gang, and I think it was one of the most difficult things for me when I started working with gang kids is I really had trouble understanding who would join an organization where in order to be a part of the gang, you have to take a beating to be in it. Most gangs, by the way, have hung on to the physical test to be a part of the gang. When I first started working with gang kids, you took a written test, you took a criminal test, and then you took a physical test. And since kids are recruited at such young ages now, the criminal test is simply assumed, and the written test has kind of gone by the wayside. Also, gangs have eliminated some of the openness about the written materials of the gang because people like myself and law enforcement, treatment professionals, teachers, principals, etc., really got their hands on those materials, and it had an impact on the gang's ability to really function with their written materials. What I found to be true is that many kids who are a part of the gang have pain, and it can come in so many different ways, and I think we all know that what's pain to one, someone else may not experience the same way. So what I find to be true is that many gang kids are depressed, many gang kids are hurting. Lots of my gang guys on probation have histories of abuse, sexual abuse and physical abuse, and I usually find that my gang kids are really kids who are suffering. My best example is I was working with two kids at the same time. One is Chicago-based, gang-involved kid, 17 years old, 6 years as a Latin King gang member. And a question that I frequently like to ask kids is, what memory would you like to erase out of your head forever? And this kid immediately said, I'm 11 years old. And to describe, you're thinking a 17-year-old kid describing an 11-year-old memory as present tense. It has to be pretty set in his mind and pretty heavy duty. So he said, I'm 11 years old. I'm on my dad's back. I'm pulling his hair and his arms and his jacket, and I'm doing everything I can possibly do to stop him from burning my mom's face on the stove again. And within a year of that particular incident, this kid joined a gang. And I don't think it's unusual for this kid to pick an organization where his rage and his pain is rewarded. And he's not just, rewarded, but revered. The angrier he is, the better he is. And so he can take the worst of what's happened to him and turn it into a positive. There's a strong kid in there somewhere. There's a healthy kid in there somewhere. And the gang picks up on a kid who can take the worst of a situation like that and, go to an organization where he can use it. The other kid was a kid from actually Glen Ellen, who all he wanted to do was play soccer. Came home in 4th grade and said to his mom, I really want to play soccer. And she said, what, are you, an idiot? You're going to get in the band and you're going to make all kinds of, have all kinds of rewards, and you're going to do well in the band, and then you're going to get a scholarship, and you're going to come out and make all kinds of money and a job. And he let go of his dream to play soccer, got into the band, and actually was doing amazingly well. First seat on the clarinet, unbelievable musician. And he describes the memory he'd like to erase forever was his 8th grade band concert when he finished a solo and stood there at his last concert, his 8th grade year, and realized that not only had his mom not come to that concert, she had never even come to one. So although we take a look at the kid who's trying to stop his dad from burning his mother's face on the stove again, his pain is really no different from the kid who experienced real abandonment from a mom who made him move, toward playing the clarinet and being in the band, and who really abandoned him and didn't experience his successes and wasn't proud of him and kind of left him kind of hanging out there. So when I work with gang kids, this is the first thing I start looking for is what drove you there, because once I can understand that, I can begin working on recovery frames to help a kid move past it. Just some reasons why kids join. This is the first one we always talk about, just a sense of belonging. If nothing else is working for you, the gang will. They need volume. They need numbers. Very few kids get denied if they want a part of that. Economics, fantasy we've talked about. What's more important to a kid than their friends? Attention, anger, very, very important. Addiction, involvement in drugs or alcohol can drive you toward an organization that will maybe not see your addiction as an issue as long as it's alcohol or marijuana, which of course in the gang are not even considered drugs at all. In the gang chapters and in the written gang materials, things like cocaine, things like heroin, are really drugs that they ask of their members and require that their members stay away from because it's their product. But addiction to marijuana or addiction to alcohol, that's not a big deal in the gang. Fear, to get to from one block to another, having to cross gang territory. Some kids join simply because they have to. Marginalization, kids who are bullied, where better to go, where, you begin to feel like you have 10,000 people who walk behind you and protect you. The gang does offer structure. You go to meetings, you have a goal, you have direction, you know what your position is, you know what's required of you. For kids who aren't experiencing family, it's a place where you feel connected, and the kids will offer you the gang offers you promises about taking care of you forever. Some kids, just because it works, it's a place where they can be successful. And for other kids, it's the thrill of what they can be doing in the gang and the things that they can participate in.
Charlotte, that's really interesting to me because if you look at that list, it really lays across essentially what Maslow talks about in terms of hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about those physiological needs at the low level with economics, and we're talking about those belongingness and love needs for kids as we work with those kids. You're talking about the bullying factor and the fear factor and the family kind of structure, all things that are matched up with those needs that Maslow talks about.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll give you that one. This is also something that I keep in my head when it comes to working with gang kids. I always remember that what we always have to give kids and why I've stayed connected to Prevention First all these years is that really the most difficult kids that you work with, and those can certainly be gang kids, and you can see that this can really be generalized, is that the most difficult kids you ever work with are kids whose frustrations are often greater than their skill base. And so in your schools, I hope that, or in your treatment programs, I hope that you have anger management groups. I hope that you have Skills 101, Life 101. I hope that you have career-based groups. I hope that you have groups for boys, groups for girls, because bolstering kids with skills is one of the best prevention things you can do for a kid. It will continue to drive them to be lifelong learners. It allows them to learn how to say no to their peers. It allows them to make good peer choices. So again, most difficult kids you work with, remember, they are kids frequently whose frustrations are greater than their skills. And when you max out on your skill base, you'll turn to anger. You'll turn to drugs. You'll turn to all kinds of misbehaviors. Fighting invisible giants, I guess what I mean by that, you've all probably read the book Fighting, I think it's Invisible Tigers maybe. But this is a phrase I've been using for a very long time. It's like that concept, if you were tired and hungry and lonely and sad and abused and hurting, could you come to work? And if you came to work, would you come to work ready to work? We expect our kids who come every day with all of those issues to come to school and be able to sit in a classroom when they're worried about their mom who's at home with an abusive man, or, their dad who's, sitting in the armchair drunk, or they haven't eaten breakfast that morning and they're pretty sure they're not going to get any dinner. So, remember that, again, the most difficult kids that you work with are often kids who come to school and hang on at all costs, and who really are fighting those invisible giants. This is something I developed a while back. It works for me, and it's been a very useful tool in working with kids. If you take a look at the gang as an addictive frame, you'll see that all of these addictions apply to gang-involved kids and young adults. And it's one of the reasons I believe that lots of treatment programs don't work for gang-involved kids and young adults, because the two things that usually drive people to get treatment are drugs and alcohol or anger. Those are the things that parents and school-based people can very quickly identify. So they go into a treatment program, and they're doing great with their anger. They're doing great with their drugs and alcohol issues. They're not using. They're not acting out in any angry way. However, the gang is good enough and smart enough to have these other elements of addiction in place. So a kid walks out of a treatment program and right back into the relationships that they are addicted to, right back into the power framework, the thrills, the tangibles, what can I get by being in the gang, avenging their anger, and of course sexual acting out and sexual conquesting. So if you're working with a gang-involved kid, make sure that you're really taking a look at many layers of addiction, or the kid will probably fail. I will tell you, just as an aside, I've been using and am very excited about, in fact, I'll be speaking about this at the gang conference in the city this summer, is the Connecticut recovery model. I'm really pleased about it because it is such a tangible recovery frame. All you need to Google it and you'll see what a great working document it is for helping kids see what they can do to change the idea of addiction in their lives. But keep this addiction wheel in mind, because it'll give you an idea of the things that you can do to attack the concept of gangs in a kid's life. Works for me. Engaging gang-involved kids, do something different. Gang kids are used to hearing two things: don't get in a gang or you're going to go to jail or you're going to wind up dead. That has no power in it for them. That's something they already knew. So do something different. Start a real dialogue. Do things with kids. Understand peer needs. The best compliment you can get from a kid you're working with is a kid who says, "Can I bring so-and-so with me next time?" Let them do it, because then it gives you some idea of what you're working with, and also will allow you to, see the best and worst of who their peers are. Having a sense of humor is really important for you. It's just as important for the kid. And one thing you find with gang-involved kids is their sense of humor is diminished by the pressures that the gang puts them under. So doing something different, having fun with them, teaching them to play. If you've ever been in my car, you'll know that anytime in my car I have 3 or 4 things always with me. One is something I call a box of objects, Legos, the Uno game, crayons, and any kind of board game or card game. These kids forget how to play, and it's really important for them. My box of objects, by the way, is just a box of anything I can collect: McDonald's toys, an empty box, a string, a crumbled up piece of paper, a pine cone, a rock. As long as there are no weapons in there, anything that might be perceived as a weapon, because it is, a knife, a toy gun, those kinds of things. Now, if a kid chooses to see a chain that you put in there as a weapon, then that'll give you something to work with. But I just have kids pick an object that describes your feelings, your family, somebody that you care about. It gives them an activity that gets them talking about themselves, which is really important. I do the same thing with Legos. Build a structure that describes whatever. It's really an opportunity for them to, again, share and talk about themselves. The Uno game, I think, is one of the single most therapeutic games on the planet. Those 5 cards that are most important in Uno, draw 2, draw 4, wild card, reverse, and what's the other card, Dale? Wild card, reverse, draw 2, draw 4, wild card, reverse, and I'll think of it. There's 5 cards. What you do is let the kids play a game of Uno. One of the cool things about it is a very universal game. And the very first thing you discover is kids don't like to talk about rules, but when they sit down to try to play a game of Uno, everybody has different rules. And so that first game with kids doesn't go very well. And then you can talk about why we have rules, why they work, and as the kids begin to seek structure in the group and design the rules for that game, you can make some great parallels to what needs to happen in the school and what needs to happen in the groups that you're developing. Then take those cards and have the kids talk about, when was a time that you dumped on somebody, like this draw 2, or like the draw 4, somebody really dumped on you. Oh, the other card is skip. When's a time that you've been skipped? When's a time when you felt like your whole life was jammed in reverse? When was a time when you weren't in control, but you wish that you were. With that card, make sure again that you stigmatize the idea of misbehavior so that you don't get glory stories. But those are the kinds of things you can do with the kids that they don't expect and that engages them in big ways. So remember those activities. Been very, very successful for me over the years. Really important, what is your goal? When you work with gang-involved kids, do you want to learn about the kid or do you want to learn about the gang? One of the mistakes I find that treatment professionals and people who work with kids, school-involved staff, school-involved personnel make is they start grilling the kids about the gang. They want to know what are the gang meetings and what are the gang colors, and they think that what they're doing is connecting with the kid, and what they're doing is making the kid the expert on gangs. So you've lost the kid and gained a gang member. So your best bet, and what seems to work for me again, and my cardinal rule is, I don't talk about the gang with the kid. I talk about the behaviors that are reducing potential success for the kid. So instead of asking about the Latin Kings, if I want to know about the Latin Kings and there's something I need to go, I go to my police department, I go to the internet, I talk to the state's attorney's office, but I will not use that time to give a kid license to be a gang member, because I make it clear to them that they're important to me as a gang member and not just important to me as a kid that I want to work with. Again, your goal should be to learn about the kid, not to learn about the gang or show them how much you know about the gang. Sometimes people get caught up letting the kid learn about what you know, telling them you've been around the block and you know this gang and you know that gang, and close calls you've had with the gang and language and whatnot. Again, the message to the kid is you're important to me because you're giving me information and I want you to know how good I am in terms of working with gangs. Stick with learning about the kid. It's the best for everybody. Another issue, again, is your rules of your program, of your facility, or of your school are very, very important. Lots of times we think that we can connect with gang-involved kids by cutting them slack, by disengaging our rules. And if you think about how the gang works and why kids are driven to the gang, they're driven to the gang because of the unbending structure. In a gang, you break a rule, you suffer a consequence without question. And then we have teachers, for instance, who tell kids, we don't chew gum in our school, but you can chew gum in my classroom, and then when you leave, make sure you spit it out. The message given to that kid is, I'll break any rule I want, and so what happens is that kid will begin to break rules in front of that teacher because they know that that teacher does not respect the school rule. You'll also hear teachers or people say, I know it's a dumb rule, but we expect you to follow it. Now, I just want you to think about how you would handle it if somebody said to you, this is a dumb rule, but I want you to follow it. As an adult, you're probably thinking, well, I'm not following that rule, and that's exactly what the kid is thinking. So very, very important. If a kid breaks a rule, hang tough on it and help them to, do what the gang would do. That's what drove them there in the first place. Control what you can. And what I mean by that is these kids will steal your heart and steal your time, and you need to know that it is your four walls that you can control. Unless you are a part of a street program where you're supposed to be working with families and you're supposed to be doing field work in that house, you control the four walls that you're in and teach the kid that the place that they are with you is a safe haven where they can talk, where they can do what they need to do to, be a better person, to treat their peers better, what have you. But control what you can. Clothing is less important than the owner. Go again by your school rules or your treatment program rules or what have you. You can focus on clothing all day long and try to get kids to remove this gang clothes and that gang, piece of clothing, but really what's important is the kid that's underneath it. So remove what you can, an earring or colors if you feel like you need to. And if it's outside of your school rules, go ahead and have them do that. But remember that the owner of those clothes is a lot more important than, working with a kid who refuses to do those things and you just let them slide. But again, if it's part of your rules, then that's what you explain. Resiliency factors, very, very important. These are the 5 things that research says if you instill even one of these in the kid, their potential to thrive and survive in the worst of circumstances just goes up incrementally. Again, sense of humor, important for you to have it, important for you to teach it to kids, and important for you to teach play to kids. Problem solving, again, I teach kids that it's not the master problem solver is not somebody who always knows the answer, but who can find the person who can help them discover a solution. So it teaches them to engage, it teaches them to rely on adults in the building, and teaches them to have appropriate relationships. Sense of future. When I did my dissertation, which was on an interview study with 2 gang members, a gang member couple, my goal was to find out what happened to their education and how did they fail the system and how did the system fail them. The young woman in the couple talked about how she felt that nobody cared about her in her school. She walked out of school one day at 14. She was angry and went home, and she remembers hoping that a truancy officer or a teacher or the principal or a dean would call her and tell her to come back, and after 3 months she gave up. She says she remembers having other kids say, thanks for coming to school and good morning, and nobody ever said that to her. And, granted, she was a fighter, she was a drunk, she was a very, very difficult kid to work with. She came to school with a whole other agenda. Her reality, again, whether it was, real or not, her reality was that nobody cared about what happened to her. If you have a program where you give homework or you're in a school, I always tell kids that school for me, homework for me, lets them know that I want to see them tomorrow. And they don't think that's nearly half as funny as I do, but it's true. I always let the kids know that I want to see them tomorrow, and I always thank every kid that I work with for coming to group or coming to school. Social competence, very, very important. Please, thank you. Looking people in the eye if it's culturally appropriate. Letting people know that you're sorry. And then mentorship. It's the -- resiliency factor. And that's the one I think that scares us the most, because we worry about mentorship, meaning that you have to spend a lot of time with a kid. And mentorship is, saying hello to a kid in the morning, stepping out into the hallway at school and being visible. If you hear a kid swear in the hallway, tell them it's not appropriate, or say, gosh, I wouldn't expect that of you. Or, what did you say? I've heard you do better. So, mentorship is modeling. Mentorship is eye contact in the hallway. And mentorship can be a long-term relationship with a kid that's kind of been assigned to you. But it comes all kinds of flavors and colors, and you can make it work any way you want. But it is one of the most important resiliency factors. It's been proven that kids who have a responsible adult in their life who is directing and appropriate and also has these resiliency factors in their life, that kid will make it over many other kids. Just some other techniques. Catch kids being good. Again, it's such a simple thing to do. Every one of the groups that I run, I close it with what I call a feedback whip. And I usually take about the last 10 to 15 minutes of group to provide every single kid with some positive feedback or something that I saw them do in group. Even if it said, you didn't participate today, but you were very attentive. Do you think that kid will ever come to group and not pay attention? Chances are he will repeat that behavior. Predicting the best. As you come into the group today, I know that everybody here is going to do a great job. You know, I don't know if you've all done your homework, but I'm willing to bet, you know, we can, you know, get some things done today. So predicting the best out of kids. Don't challenge ideology. You cannot challenge what kids believe to be true about the gang. It's not going to serve you to get in an argument with a kid who's been trained and who is ready by means of what the gang has offered him to argue about the ideology of the gang. Scoop and snoop, you know, I talk about, again, don't get in a situation with a gang kid where you're looking for gang information. And in terms of the other piece is don't pretend that you're a person of the street or that you have lots of street information if it's not a part of who you are. Those adults look generally pretty foolish to kids. So again, I don't use street language and I'll talk street language with kids. It's not who I am. I'm just myself when I'm with them. The peer model, I want you to look back at a guy named Dreikers. Dreikers is the guy that put together the 4 goals of misbehavior. Why do kids do what they do? And Dreikers put together a concept that talks about revenge. Kids misbehave because they want to get back at you or get back at others. Kids misbehave because they want attention. Kids misbehave because they want power. Or kids misbehave because they don't have skills. And so, you know, what Dreikers did is he asked you to compartmentalize kids and to begin to build a repertoire of responses according to what you experience that kid is needing. Now, I loved Dreikers, except I really felt like some of his stuff wasn't really positive, and I wanted to put a more positive spin on it. So when I say peer model, I'm looking at goals of misbehavior as power, esteem, which is the same as Dreikers' attention, excuse, meaning that the kid just is a hurting kid, he's almost looking for an opportunity to go off, and release, meaning that the kid may be an already labeled kid. He's ED, LD, BD, ADD, ADHD, and he needs energy opportunities in all that he does, and he's a much better doer than just somebody who can think or be lectured to. So really plan for the behavior. It's something that we don't do well. Many times as teachers, we have this awesome lesson plan book. We do a great job with it. We plan for the media and the page number we're on and the book we're going to work out of. And then we expect that every kid's going to behave, even though we know 3 kids in our classroom can just terrorize us. And so instead of planning for behavior, we just kind of hope they're absent. And you can plan for behavior. You can identify the behaviors that frustrate you. You know what your style is, and you can improve on it every day by thinking of ways to respond to kids with difficult behaviors. For instance, refusal skills, a kid who, you know, smarts back to you, a kid who is silent and seething. You know, think about, go looking for, the internet is a wonderful place to look, how have other people handled this and what's worked for them. Also know your style. You know, are you confrontive? Are you uncomfortable with anger? Are you open to discussing things that, you know, can make you uncomfortable? Know your style and work within it. Now this is, you know, as we kind of wrap things up here a little bit, and I hope you'll have some questions, or, you know, we'll find a way to contact me if you want to talk more about gang kids. But working in a suburban gang grouping with an older guy, one of the things I asked him is, you know, how do you guys do it? How do you have such incredible longevity? How do you get kids in the gang no matter what? How do you have these older gangs who, you know, at all costs to them and their families, you know, they have legal difficulties, they never have a job, You know, they're tattooed to the hilt with gang tattoos and nobody wants to hire them, or their legal histories, you know, continue to point to criminality. How do you get guys who are willing to basically give up their potential for a career, their potential for success? How do you get kids who are willing to take a beating, who are willing to give up their families? How do you do it? And I thought that his quote was really, really very telling. He basically said, I'll always have kids in my gang because I have the time. And basically what he's reminding us is he will put those resiliency factors into place and organize them around his special gang interests and his special gang needs. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those. I'd just like you to remember that, you know, very, very interested in working with snowballs and participating in those kinds of things. And if you have gang questions, you can always find me on Google.
Feel free at this point to ask Charlie any questions that you have.
Hello, Charlie. Can you hear me?
Yes,
hello?
we can hear you.
Okay, great. I have one quick question. You know, I mean, I like working with gang members that are not your relatives. At times could, you know, I don't know. I guess I feel more confident doing that. And I do have a real close relative of mine that has had previous gang involvement, and there's a lot of behaviors that at times he exposes that kind of like show that, you know, he's still, I mean, you know, I want to say almost involved in this lifestyle. So, I mean, you know, I try to reach out to him, but I kind of find it sometimes a little bit challenging being, you know, a very close relative, to be honest, a brother of his, you know. So, I mean, do you have any advice for, like, when you're trying to reach out to a brother or relative? I mean, would you say that I should maybe find someone else, or should I kind of find a way to work with this so that, you know, I can kind of like try to understand my brother a little bit more?
Okay. So just let me make sure that I'm going to answer your question the way you want. Your brother is gang involved, and you'd really like to be able to reach out to him. Seems to be a divide in terms of the lifestyle you've chosen and the lifestyle this person has chosen. You have to decide, what is your goal? Is your goal a relationship, or is your goal to maneuver him away from the gangs, or is your goal to help him understand your position about his involvement in the gang? So which of those three would you say would be true?
Well, I mean, I think relationship-wise, we're pretty good, you know. I mean, he'll call me, I call him, you know. I mean,
Awesome.
you know, so we have a real nice, tight brotherly relationship. But there's like, at times, you know, I really see like the gang in him. So I talk to him, you know, look, bro, you know, and I mean, you know, I notice like he hides away right away. As soon as I try to talk to him about anything that has to do with the gang, he'll like want to hide away from me, you know. And I'll be, I guess I really want to know, how do you work with that, you know? I mean, so that, you know, he doesn't feel like I'm really trying to pick at him or something, you know.
I
mean, he's a
gotcha.
grown man now. Yeah.
You know,
hmm
I guess, you know, since he is trying to pull away when it comes to the gang stuff, you're going to have to open up the conversation. And I guess sometimes when it feels like the right time to you, you can just say, you know, we never really have to talk about this for me to have a relationship with you, but I want you to know that if you ever want to talk about your gang involvement, or you would ever want to find a way out, or you would ever want, you know, to have a discussion, I can't judge you. I don't want to judge you, but I do want to understand it, and I want the best for you. So sometimes I worry that the choices that you're going to have in a gang organization are not going to be the choices that you deserve. You deserve much more. So, I mean, you already know, I mean, this is a great guy. This is somebody you have a relationship with, somebody who wants to connect to you. He may really just be waiting for you to open it up and say, I want more for you. I'm not judging the gang. I'm not judging anybody in it, but I'm afraid that the choices available in the organization are going to change or diminish your potential. So I think you just have to open it up and say, never would I judge you. And if you don't want to talk about it, okay. But I'm always here to talk about it. So just leave it wide open and leave the dialogue open for it and let him know that you're willing to. He might be worried about being judged.
Right, okay. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Hearing none, I would like to thank Charla once again for joining us today and speaking to us about this important topic. And again, want to remind you of our upcoming webinar on positive youth development next week. Please join us for that if you're available to do so. And as always, you can find out more information about the Student Assistance Center on our website at www.prevention.org. And you can follow us once again on Twitter. That Twitter handle again is @SACenterPF. So look for us on Twitter and at our website. Thank you very much, Charla, and thank you all for attending today.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.